Hey, what is up guys, I'm KBHD here, and this is the iPad Air 2. Now this can be a pretty simple, relatively easy review video because we saw the iPad Air 1, did a review video of it last year, and overall as a category, these iPads and basically any large tablet have sort of slowed down into this iteration year by year. We see them get a little bit better, but there aren't that many drastic changes made. So really the easiest way to show this is to give you a list of the ways it's changed versus the iPad Air 1. So these are all the changes made to create the iPad Air 2. So number one is the iPad Air 2 is thinner and lighter than the first iPad Air. So the first one was already really thin and light, but this new Air 2 is just 0.96 pounds, so lighter, and 6.1 millimeters thin, so thinner than any other tablet out there. And believe me, that translates really well from paper and just numbers to actual hardware and holding in the hand. So the build of this thing is almost surreal. It's completely made of metal all around, which is great. And it has rounded sides and chamfered edges all the way around too. And it kind of just feels like the display is attached to almost nothingness at this point. I mean, this is kind of the reason why I say it feels like large tablets are hitting their stride right now. If you showed this iPad Air to someone 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, they'd probably flip out and think it's impossibly thin. There's no way that's real. But it's not just about thinness. The fact that it's also lighter means it's just as easy as any other tablet to hold in the hand. And while it's definitely not a one-handed tablet, it's much easier to hold with one hand and type and poke with the other hand when the tablet is so light like this. So the side bezels are thinned out a little, but there's still plenty of room to rest your thumb. So overall, it's really well thought out. I mean, the design, we've seen it before, and it's sort of set a standard for build quality, and it's pretty deserving of the name. The only quirks with this new thinner and lighter hardware is that the mute switch that's been on the side of every single iPad and iPhone since the beginning is now gone. It's been replaced with a software toggle in the quick settings of iOS 8. And I don't even think that the tablet is too thin for this. It's just, I guess, a design decision by Apple, a conscious choice to not have it. But the other downside of going so thin and light is the space inside is a little bit smaller, and that means you have a smaller battery. But the thing is, it's still a great battery life for a tablet. I didn't even notice having to charge it more versus any other iPad. It has great stamina, lasts basically all day with any use, and has the classic iPad ridiculous standby time where you can leave it at 85%, not use it for a week, and pick it up to use it, and it'll be right ready at like 82%. So technically, yes, it is a smaller battery. It's a 15% smaller cell coming in at 7,340 milliamp hours. And yes, I should be mad at them for sacrificing battery just to make it thinner again. But it's at that point where I haven't actually yet noticed a difference in battery life. So I guess that's something iOS on a tablet has going for it. Now, one of the biggest and best improvements of the iPad Air 2 is its new display. It's still a Retina display, and it still has the same 4:3 aspect ratio and 2048 by 1536 resolution. Still the same great colors and color reproduction, brightness levels and everything like that. But it's now a fully laminated display, which actually ironically means less air between the glass and the panel. So this and the anti-reflective coating is supposed to give the new screen a much more glare-free look, like the image is closer to the surface of the glass. And I actually thought it pretty much seemed like I was touching the pixels, like the image was floating right on top of the iPad as I touched it, and the Retina display looked great. Except I already thought that about the old iPad screens. So maybe they all look great. Honestly, you probably won't be able to tell the difference until you see them side by side. I actually think Ty Moss's speed test video accidentally does a really good job of showing the difference between the display on the iPad Air 2 and the original Air. I'll link that below if you want to watch it. But besides that, I did notice a little bit of a black gap around the edges of the display, just a little bit of a gap. It's something I've noticed other laminated displays have too, and it would be a little distracting sometimes, but a lot of times I just didn't even notice. And it would be less noticeable on the gray iPad, which has black front bezels instead of white. Another improvement with the Air 2 is the specs inside. So the Air 2 is rocking Apple's new A8X chip, which is their best mobile chip yet by a long shot. And without getting too technical, it's essentially a triple-core, 3-core processor. And you also now, finally, for the first time in Apple tablet history, get 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now, the A8X, this chip, it's incredible. It's super powerful. It's really thermally efficient. This tablet basically never heats up on me. And it powers iOS 8 as smoothly as you'd expect. I mean, there's no hiccups here. This is iOS 8 at its finest. There's not a whole lot of extra stuff going on. Obviously, it's just a grid of icons, but it better be this smooth in 2014 with specs like this. But on a tablet, I've said this before, everything feels like a blown up version of the phone interface here on the iPad. It's not really taking much advantage of all those pixels and all that power. And with 2 gigabytes of RAM, you would think Apple would find some awesome, seriously advanced iPad multitasking stuff to throw in there. But it's still the same interface as any other. Granted, I'm sure apps will stay open in the background longer without having to refresh, but honestly, unless you're doing some heavy gaming or messing with some 3D graphics apps or something really intensive like that, you're probably not going to notice the spec difference between the Air 2 and the original Air, even though it is a lot better. So that brings us to the little things. There are just a couple of other little things sprinkled in there to make this iPad Air 2 a really compelling tablet for a lot of people that they'll hopefully try to get them to spend their money on. They upgraded the camera. Now, yes, I know, it's rocking an even better 8 megapixel camera. It's essentially the exact same optics as the iPhone 5S. And sure, I'll give credit to Apple. You're right. The iPad is probably the best camera viewfinder out there. Technically, that's true. And as beautiful as it might be to look in front of your face, it still doesn't mean you should take pictures all the time or video with your tablet. But hey, the iPhone 5S took pretty good pictures, so does the iPad. You also get Touch ID now, the fingerprint sensor over the home button that you can use to unlock the tablet, but it kind of stops short of a lot of potential. I mean, there's no NFC, so you can't use it for Apple Pay, but there are no multiple account sign-ins on iOS, for example, so you can't sign into a different profile with a different fingerprint. Stuff like that's missing. I guess it's still the early stages of Touch ID, technically, but basically it's just for unlocking right now. But it's there. And I also got to mention that super reflective Apple logo, which was a fingerprint magnet like crazy, but when the tablet's clean, that thing is a serious eye catcher. And the speaker on the iPad, which was very, very, very loud. So it's actually so loud that it vibrates the entire tablet at its loudest volume. And then when you put it down on a sort of a vibrating surface like a wooden table, the chassis makes it even louder, so it resonates through whatever surface you put it on. So it's kind of funny. It's not the best quality in the world, and it's still sideways facing, but the loudness was impressive. So overall, as a whole package, you gotta admit the iPad Air 2 is pretty sweet. Even though I'm more into smaller tablets at the moment, like the Nexus 9 and the iPad mini. And speaking of the iPad mini 3, which has come out recently, I didn't even want to touch it or talk about it at all, but essentially, just for those of you who are curious, it is the same exact product as the iPad mini 2 with Retina display, just added a gold version and Touch ID. So what this essentially means is the previous version, which dropped $100, is now a really good deal, and if you want to continue spending full price to get Touch ID and Gold, that's up to you, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend specifically buying the iPad mini 2 if you're into a smaller iPad. But I'm also going to be reviewing another smaller tablet coming up soon, the Nexus 9, and a whole bunch of other things. Like I said, November is a pretty busy month for tech, but this has been my impressions of all the stuff that's new in the iPad Air 2, and you can choose for yourself if you think that's worth upgrading. I personally would say, for some people, but again, it's up to you. So that's been it. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.